Welcome to Trending Unpacked, the show where we explore the stories behind the trends shaping our world.
It's good to be here.
Today, we are taking on a necessary and frankly profoundly difficult topic. We're looking at the tragedy that occurred in early September 2025, the shooting at a Mormon church, specifically a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints location in Michigan.
Yeah, this one really hit hard. It immediately grabbed the headlines nationally, didn't it? And the impact, well, it rippled far beyond just the local community.
Absolutely. Whenever violence happens in a place of worship, it sends this immediate shockwave, you know?
It really does. It prompts these really intense national conversations about safety, community, what sanctuary even means anymore.
So our mission today is to try and move beyond just those initial headlines. We want to synthesize the factual events, sure, but also the really complex reactions and the broader societal implications this whole thing raised.
Exactly. We want to give you, the learner, the context to understand not just what happened, but maybe why this story trended so intensely. And, what vulnerabilities it sort of exposes in modern American life.
It's definitely an essential analysis and a sobering one. It forces us to look at how that ideal of community openness, well, how it clashes with the demand for physical security these days.
Right. In our sort of 21st century gathering spaces, we'll be handling the source material with the gravity it obviously demands.
Okay. Before we really jump into the facts, just a quick look ahead. In our next session, we'll be turning our analytical lens toward the really heated discussions around H-1B visas. That's a whole different area, touching on tech, labor, global economics.
Big topic.
Big topic. But first, let's unpack the facts of this tragedy in Michigan.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start with the basics, focusing just on what the sources confirm about the incident itself. So early September 2025, LDS Church, Michigan. Can you walk us through the established facts, the timing, the scale of it?
Certainly. The incident happened while a gathering was actually underway, which illustrates how these attacks often prey on those moments of community vulnerability when people are together.
Right, when they feel safest, maybe?
Possibly, yeah. The core facts are grim. It was a mass casualty event. The sources confirm multiple casualties reported right there at the scene. So just a rapid, profound infliction of violence in a space designed for peace.
And the immediate reports focused on the number of victims, understandably, but you're saying the key thing for our analysis is the location.
Absolutely. The house of worship. That fundamentally changes the nature of the trauma, the way people react, the questions that get asked afterwards.
And the response from law enforcement, the sources say it was rapid. They secured the scene quickly.
They did. And while that speed obviously doesn't undo the tragedy, the sources do place significance on the efficiency of that response.
In such a high-stress situation.
Exactly. That rapid response is crucial, for neutralizing the threat quickly, preventing further loss of life, stabilizing what's obviously a highly volatile situation.
Right. Securing the perimeter. That's the step that shifts it from an active threat to a crime scene investigation, basically.
Precisely. But, that efficiency also highlights a broader issue, doesn't it? The need for such a rapid response implies this was just a sudden eruption in a place that was, well, likely completely unprepared for that kind of violence.
That makes sense. So moving beyond the immediate tactical response, let's think about the psychological impact. The societal aftermath. How did the local community react? And the authorities? This violation of a sacred space.
Well, the sources consistently emphasize profound shock in the local community. And I think it's important to understand this goes beyond just typical sorrow.
It's amplified somehow.
It's amplified because of the specific nature of the location. A church isn't just a building, it's a sanctuary, yes. But for many people, especially in tight-knit communities, these places are like familial anchors. They're spaces where trust is just assumed. Doors are often unlocked, literally and metaphorically. And when that assumption is so violently betrayed, the trauma doesn't just hit the direct victims. It shatters the whole community's collective sense of security, of trust, even in the most basic parts of civic life.
And we saw that reflected pretty immediately in the responses from leadership, right? Michigan's governor condemned it publicly. Religious leaders from different faiths issued strong condemnations, too.
Yes, and that coordinated high-level condemnation is really essential. It provides moral and political clarity. The governor uses the state's platform to say, look, this isn't just a crime, it's an attack on our shared values.
And the religious leaders?
They step in with immediate pastoral care, spiritual framing for the tragedy, that dual response, governmental authority and spiritual comfort. It's vital for starting the recovery process.
And the message they delivered, it was explicitly about unity, wasn't it? A call for unity and healing. Why is emphasizing unity so powerful, so necessary right after something like this?
Well, if you think about the function of this kind of violence, often it's meant to fracture communities, right? To sow fear, suspicion, to make people retreat from public life.
Okay.
So by immediately and loudly calling for unity, leaders are pushing back against that. They're providing an explicit counter-narrative. They're saying, look, our shared values, whether civic or spiritual, they're stronger than this destructive act.
It's an affirmation of collective strength.
Exactly. It's the first step toward rebuilding that community trust that's been so severely damaged.
Which brings us right to the symbolic weight of the location itself. You mentioned this earlier. It's not just about physical safety being breached. It's the idea of sanctuary being violated.
That's the absolute crux of it. What's fascinating here is the symbolic weight of that LDS building itself, particularly when you think about the architectural style, the way these buildings function, which is maybe a bit unique to this denomination.
How so? How does the architecture or the usage maybe amplify that vulnerability?
Well, yeah. Unlike some faiths that might have, more extensive professional staff or even sort of fortress-like construction sometimes, the specific LDS meeting houses, the chapels, they're generally designed to be really accessible, very community-run.
So less formal security.
Often, yeah. They often lack professional contracted security. The design usually prioritizes welcoming large numbers of people for all sorts of activities, Sunday worship, sure, but also youth groups, sports, community events, often through a single main entrance that stays unlocked during operating hours. It reflects their whole doctrine of open welcome community outreach.
So when violence happens there, it feels like it proves that the very thing they stand for, that openness, is somehow incompatible with physical safety in today's world.
Exactly. That's the profound societal and cultural concern this raises. It forces us to ask, what does sanctuary even mean now? Does it still exist in the way we thought? Or has the sort of pervasive nature of gun violence made every open, welcoming space vulnerable?
It's that tension, the ideal of the open welcome versus the need for physical security.
That becomes the central challenge, doesn't it? For this denomination and others like it, policy-wise, spiritually. The decision to, say, harden the building, put in more security, it essentially requires sacrificing a spiritual value for a physical necessity.
Wow. Okay, that central challenge, openness versus security, that definitely didn't stay local. It migrated online almost immediately, right? And the conversation just fragmented.
As it always does online, yeah.
Yeah.
Intense, often polarized debates. But let's look first at the sort of universal response, the immediate emotion.
The grief.
The grief, yeah. In the immediate hours and days after,
Yeah.
the online world was it was characterized by this overwhelming, widespread outpouring of sympathy. Social media basically became these massive, temporary digital vigils.
It's amazing how fast that happens now.
It is, and that instantaneous expression of collective grief is really a defining feature of how we respond to tragedy now.
Is it different from traditional mourning, beyond just the speed?
I think so. It's the instant global reach, maybe, and the way digital spaces let people connect seemingly disparate events. You see solidarity from people who've maybe never heard of the LDS faiths, never been to Michigan.
But they recognize the violation of a sacred place.
Exactly, that resonates. And this sort of global network of empathy, even if it's virtual, it provides a significant source of immediate connection for those affected. It extends support way beyond the local congregation's boundaries.
But that sympathy, it quickly turned practical, didn't it? That's when the security debate really kicked off online.
It did. The really wrenching debate you mentioned, people started talking specifics.
Like what measures were being discussed?
Practical stuff. Should churches use volunteer security teams? Often congregants with concealed carry permits? Should they hire off-duty police? Install permanent physical barriers, metal detectors, secure vestibules?
And just proposing those things became a lightning rod.
Absolutely. Because it highlighted that core tension again. The philosophical objection is rooted right in the mission of the church. Well, critics online argued that adopting these measures fundamentally changes the nature of the sacred space, turning a house of worship into essentially a fortified compound.
Right.
It exchanges that spiritual feeling of sanctuary, maybe the belief that God protects this space, for a manufactured physical security.
It implies a lack of faith, in a way.
That was the argument from some quarters, yeah. That it implies a lack of faith in the inherent peace of the sacred space itself.
But hang on, didn't the sources mention that some faith communities already have volunteer security teams? Suggesting that boundary was maybe already being crossed before this tragedy?
That's a really crucial counter-argument. And yeah, the sources do touch on that. Many communities, especially those targeted before, or maybe those in higher crime areas, they had already made compromises on that ideal of pure openness.
But maybe not in suburban Michigan.
Likely not to the same extent, no. For many congregations like the one involved here, that discussion was probably theoretical. This shooting made that compromise feel like an immediate, unavoidable necessity for many. And the online debate just reflected that deep ideological split. pragmatic protection versus maintaining the welcoming spirit at all costs.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, violence in a church inevitably brings up the national gun law conversation again. We have to touch on the specific legislative ideas that surged after this.
Oh, instantly. This tragedy became a powerful new flashpoint. It shifted the conversation immediately from just local church security to national policy. And yeah, the online discussions were, as you'd expect, highly polarized. But it's worth detailing the specific tools both sides were advocating for.
Okay, let's start with the reform advocates. What were they pushing for? What specific laws did they say could prevent something like this?
Well, they pointed to this as, undeniable proof that things like universal background checks need to be implemented nationwide, closing existing loopholes, especially in private gun sales. That was a big one.
To stop weapons getting into the wrong hands.
That's the argument, yes.
Yeah.
And also red flag laws. That debate got renewed intensity. These are the laws allowing temporary removal of firearms from someone a court deems a danger. Advocates see them as vital intervention tools when warning signs appear, which, sadly, often happens before mass violence events.
Okay. And how did those defending existing Second Amendment interpretations push back on those points?
The opposition tended to focus on two main things: constitutional due process and the idea that new laws mainly burden law-abiding citizens.
Okay.
So defenders of existing laws argued universal background checks are an undue burden and ultimately ineffective because criminals, well, they don't follow laws anyway. And on red flag laws, the objection was often constitutional concerns about due process, taking weapons before a crime, potentially without adequate adversarial proceedings.
So they pivot away from new regulations.
Often, yes. They pivot towards maybe deficiencies in mental health care or failures in enforcing the laws we already have.
So the event itself, the tragedy in Michigan, it almost becomes a proxy, used to fuel these really entrenched political fights.
That's often what happens, isn't it? And the takeaway for you, the learner, is really that this serves as a sharp reminder of just how deep, how emotional, how constitutionally tangled this debate is in the U.S. A tragedy doesn't really create a new debate. It just pours gasoline on an old fire. It re-entrenches those existing positions with, renewed intensity.
Right. Okay, moving beyond the politics and the policy for a moment, there was another reaction online, wasn't there? A specific, maybe more nuanced one from faith-based groups.
Yes, absolutely. And it provided a kind of counter-narrative to just the despair or the policy arguments. These groups use their digital platforms not just to express grief, but for a very public display of spiritual resilience.
How did they do that? What did that look like?
They explicitly offered a way to process this incomprehensible loss that went beyond just legislative fixes or security debates. They drew on their core beliefs.
And how did that resilience show up in their specific doctrines, maybe?
Yeah. For this specific denomination and others that have a strong focus on eternal purpose, resilience came through reaffirming those core beliefs. Things like spiritual strength, divine purpose, the idea of an afterlife. These became anchors amid the tragedy.
So it provides a framework.
Exactly. A framework that allows them to shift the focus from the external failure, the failure of security or policy or whatever, to internal doctrinal strength. Faith provides a structure for processing senseless evil. It offers a hope or a certainty that tries to transcend the immediate devastating reality of the attack.
It underscores faith as a coping mechanism.
A vital, practical coping mechanism in the face of that kind of trauma.
Yeah. Let's move from those immediate reactions and online debates now and try to put this into a broader context, historically, societally.
Right. Because what's really striking here and deeply saddening is that the Michigan event isn't some isolated anomaly. It's part of a continuing painful trend in America.
When violence hits a place of worship, our minds do immediately jump to those other high-profile, awful events, don't they? We probably need to connect Michigan to those past tragedies to really grasp its weight.
Absolutely. We have to systematically connect this to events like the Charleston church shooting back in 2015.
Mother Emanuel AME.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting in 2018. Tree of Life. When you analyze these events together, they reveal this chilling pattern of just evolving vulnerability in American sacred spaces.
Okay, so what are the key differences, maybe, or similarities in the motives behind those three big events? Because that seems crucial for the analysis.
It is critical.
Yeah.
Charleston, for instance, was explicitly an act of racial terrorism. The motive was crystal clear: targeting black worshipers, driven by racial hatred, aiming to incite a race war.
Horrific.
Utterly. And Pittsburgh was similarly specific an anti-Semitic hate crime, targeting Jewish identity and belief. These were attacks where the location was chosen because of the faith or the racial identity of the people inside.
Right, targeted identity attack. So how does Michigan fit, especially if, as you mentioned, the shooter's specific motive wasn't immediately confirmed as, say, anti-Mormon hatred?
Well, if the sources don't confirm a specific identity-based hate motive, and that often takes time to establish, if ever, then it could suggest a shift or at least a broadening of the pattern.
How so?
It could move from that specific ideologically driven identity violence towards something broader, maybe a more randomized attack on just any generic, unguarded public gathering space that happens to be a church.
So the target becomes the vulnerability itself?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Both types of attacks inflict profound community trauma, obviously.
Yeah.
But the latter type, if that's what Michigan represents, suggests that the vulnerability of the sacred space, its openness, has itself become a sufficient draw for violence,
Yeah.
even without a specific hatred for the group inside.
Doesn't that imply something bigger, like a failure of the state or society to protect public life in general, rather than just specific groups from targeted hate?
I think it does point in that direction. The collective significance of these events, Charleston, Pittsburgh, Michigan, and others, is that they show religious identity can be a target, yes, but also maybe any place that prioritizes openness and welcome becomes a risk.
They turn places meant for peace into sites of trauma.
Exactly. They transform these intended sites of communal safety and reflection into locations of profound trauma. It signals a really deep breakdown in civic society, where even those most sacred social boundaries like basic respect for a place of worship are just disregarded.
Which raises that important question you touched on. How has the scope of U.S. gun violence changed to now routinely include places like churches? It feels like the reach is just constantly expanding.
That feeling is definitely supported by the trend data we see. According to the source material, gun violence continues to affect this widening circle of what we used to think of as protected sectors. We see the awful trend continuing in schools.
Tragically, yes.
We track it in workplaces, office buildings, and now, with increasing frequency, we see it in religious institutions, across different faiths, different denominations. It suggests this expanding battlefield for violence, pushing beyond any historical boundaries.
So the implication isn't just, oh, churches need better security. It's that the security problem is systemic. It permeates all these traditionally protected areas.
I think that's the unavoidable conclusion. It suggests a systemic breakdown of safety that really spans all traditionally protected areas of American life, eroding trust in public spaces generally.
The classroom, the workplace, the altar.
Exactly. The fact that the list of compromised sanctuaries now includes all of those suggests a systemic failure that transcends specific environments. That traditional idea that we're safe here, even if not there, that's rapidly eroding. The Michigan tragedy forces us to confront this uncomfortable reality that society's protective mechanisms seem to be failing across the board.
Leaving people to navigate this high-risk environment even when doing routine things like going to church or school.
Precisely. Even in the pursuit of routine activities.
Okay, so let's try and bring this analysis back to the learner listening right now. What's the core lesson we should take away from synthesizing all these facts, these reactions, this context? It sounds like we're stuck between an ideal and a really devastating reality.
I think that's a good way to put it. The core lesson for you, the learner, really is that inescapable tension between the ideal of an open, welcoming, inclusive society, which is, a foundational promise of democracy, and the harsh reality of needing physical security just to survive in that society.
And the Michigan tragedy just crystallizes that tension.
It really does. We aspire as a society to be open, to welcome the stranger. But that very openness now carries this inherent severe risk of attracting external violence, external malevolence.
So what demand does that tension place on leaders, on policymakers, community leaders?
It demands, I think, critical reflection. It demands innovative action. And it demands a reckoning with the psychological cost of just constant vigilance.
Yeah.
The tragedy compels society to examine how we protect community gathering spots, churches, sure, but also libraries, parks, community centers, while simultaneously upholding those values of unity and inclusion that the Michigan governor and religious leaders called for.
That's the challenge. Can we find safety measures that don't gut the very ethos of welcome and community?
That's the immense challenge. Can we develop solutions, architectural, training-based, policy-based, that acknowledge the risk without destroying the heart of the community? That is the lasting, difficult question this event poses.
A question that demands ongoing scrutiny, for sure. The idea that society itself has to calculate the risk involved in simply being open, that's maybe the most sobering takeaway.
It really is. When the ideal of sanctuary is breached, the cost isn't just measured in the tragic loss of human lives. It's also measured in that pervasive, harder to quantify loss of trust in the world just outside our own front door.
This has been a necessary, but yeah, deeply sobering analysis. Let's quickly summarize the key takeaways from our discussion today.
Okay. Well, we covered the shocking facts of the Michigan Mormon church shooting in September 2025. We detailed the multiple casualties and talked about the critical importance of law enforcement's swift response in stabilizing that scene.
We analyzed the profound shock that hit the local community and that immediate unified call for healing from both state and religious leaders. We focus particularly on how the architecture and the mission of that specific LDS church perhaps intensified the feeling that the sanctuary ideal itself had been violated.
Right. And we unpacked those intense online debates. We got into some detail on the specific policy proposals, universal background checks versus the Second Amendment defenses, and also that difficult ideological split about implementing high-level security in places that are fundamentally designed for openness and welcome.
And finally, we placed the incident into its broader, painful context. We compared it to historical tragedies like Charleston and Pittsburgh, highlighting that disturbing trend of religious institutions becoming targets, which really underscores this broad, systemic vulnerability of American public spaces today.
Yeah. The event ultimately underscores the huge societal weight we place on religious institutions, expecting them to be moral anchors, but also physical anchors. And it highlights the profound resilience required when that physical sanctuary is breached.
The enduring challenge remains.
It does. Finding safety without sacrificing the spiritual, the civic soul of the gathering place. That's the challenge for all communities.
Thank you for joining us for this essential analysis, definitely a topic that requires some serious reflection.
Indeed.
In our next session, we'll be unpacking those heated discussions around H-1B visas, what they mean for workers, for families, and for the economy. Until then, stay informed and stay curious.